Hope everyone enjoyed the break and their lunch, and thank you very much for coming back this afternoon. Just a reminder that at 6 o'clock this evening, there's the International Day of Light Drinks reception in the South Cloisters, and everyone is very much welcome to come along that and celebrate and network. We've now got the plenary session from this morning's talks. I'd like to again thank all the speakers for very informative and interesting talks, and all for staying on time with their talks, which made my job a lot easier. There were some very interesting and thought-provoking ideas there, and just a few items I scribbled down, but there was plenty more, was are current metrics appropriate for modern applications? Performance is not just based on photoreceptors. Climate-based daylight modelling and useful daylight illuminance. HDR imaging. Daylight glazing, is it the end of daylight design? The IoT, what do we actually want technology to do? Circular economy. Technological improvements, invisible rabbits, and fish. So based on just those and everything else, I'd like to open up to the floor for some questions to our speakers.
Right then.
Okay.
Where's the plant?
Since everybody else is a bit reluctant, I suppose my question would be, I'd like to ask the panel where they think opportunities for forward leaps in what we do in lighting over the next 10 years or so.
Well, first it'd be nice to actually find out what's going on by routinely measuring in spaces. The only spaces that do get routinely measured are the heritage ones for conservation purposes. But it'd be nice to have something that would act as a datum. I mean, not maybe on the horizontal, but something on the wall or whatever. But you just have some routine logging to give us something, some idea of what's going on. That would be a good start. A sensor that really shouldn't cost more than about 20 quid.
I think, from my point of view, much as I perhaps against the IoT, I think controls will give us a big leap forward, because at the minute the lighting industry tends to care about people. But realistically, if you look at the lighting in here, space, and if we can get controls, we can then start to have lighting that actually belongs to people, as opposed to belongs to a space.
Okay.
And I think that will make a big difference.
Okay.
Well, I've been asked this question a few times, so I didn't know you were going to ask it. I was somewhat prepared. So a year ago, I had a sabbatical, and I went around to a large number of manufacturers and stakeholders, government, and so on. And I devised two things that we could probably address, both of which I think have extreme social value. One is roadway safety. We're still lighting roads like we did in the 50s. And the other is the area of light and health. How do we get light in a way to enhance your biological rhythms? Those are probably the two most important. But to the point made here is that we can say we can do anything we want to do, but you still need to know from an engineering perspective, did I get it? How do I measure it? How do I know if I'm going to have human-centric lighting? And I accept your point, but what else could it be? And I like your point about lighted spaces, not people, but the point is, controls, I'm trying to be controversial, so you'll forgive me. I've heard the same thing since the 1980s when I worked with it. Controls were going to save us and they were all going to do it, but you still don't have the metrics to know whether you've got what you want, other than energy, because we do measure that. But then it becomes an energy-saving strategy, not a human-centric strategy at all. So my view is that if we're going to deal with things like roadway safety, which really do matter, and now with autonomous cars and things like that, maybe that all goes away, but nevertheless, there'll probably still be people driving. You need to know from an engineering perspective, how do I deliver it, and how do I know I actually got what I wanted? And horizontal luminance is not going to tell you anything about whether you did or did not meet those social expectations.
Just to give a slight reply.
Oh, please.
I remember a few years ago, I was in a European country, and I got to the hotel and I went, I'm here, and they sort of looked at me and went, that's a pity. We forgot you were coming. And there was no rooms. So they said, because it's our fault, you get the top floor suite at the same price. So I thought, yes. So I had big picture windows looking over some mountains and no light switches. It had a little computer screen on the wall, and that controlled everything in the room. And it took me about 15 minutes to turn a light on. And I actually stood there going, I will not ring for help, I'm a lighting engineer. So the difference between controls that don't give you what you want and controls that give you what you want is enormous. And if you can actually use controls to get what you want without chucking your phone at the wall, that's the metric.
Fair enough.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
Here it is.
Ah,
I have one about metrics. I presume, Mark, your metrics based upon the cone absorbance spectra only. For the other two receptors in the eye, and possibly also some of the ones we've recently learned about. But there you're working from the assumption that the light that is important for the individual is that which we measure physiologically in the retina. Now, supposing that we were to ignore that for a moment and just to ask the question, for an observer's preference, what of the myriad of different spectral outputs would they actually end up preferring? You get a rather different answer. So, for example, in experiments we've recently done, people who have migraine with aura will choose as comfortable lighting with a stronger saturation than lighting than other people. So there's something neurological about their preference that has nothing to do with the front sensory organs. So I'm wondering whether we should relax our consideration of light as what's the word I want? Can't think of the word anymore. As transmuted by the retina. We consider it more generically. So if we take, for example, a task and we give an observer all the control they wanted, what would they then end up producing for us as preferred? And it's a very different game, but it's one we can now play because we have that freedom to produce light of any spectrum properties. And with that freedom, we need to constrain it in a way that's suitable for individuals. And that's a tall order, actually, given that individuals are very individual.
Well, I think there's a question there.
I'm sorry. I think there is. It's a huge question.
In response, I think, first of all, I think all of us have to be reminded where we are now, which is 1924. So I think that in small steps, we can do a great deal more by looking at what is now orthodox retinal physiology with regard to transduction, if that's the word you're looking
That's the
for,
word I wanted. Thank you.
of photons into neurons. Is that the complete picture? Obviously not. But I think it would be a significant step, and it's attainable. But had a very complicated question, so I think you also mean, are there other phototransduction mechanisms other than the ones that we think we know about? And I guess I don't know what I don't know, but I'm under the assumption that when it comes to light, and if you're not a gecko or a chicken, it all goes through the retina, so I can't get to the brain from light unless I go through the retina. So understanding those phototransduction mechanisms and the wires that actually go to the brain seem to me, as a scientist, where I would start. I know you've kind of started at the other end, which is looking phenomenologically at these things. And I'm not dismissing that at all, don't misunderstand me, but right now I think there's a scientific gap between...
Yeah, we've got to fill a gap.
That's right, that's right. So I can't really speak meaningfully on other mechanisms. I only know what I know, and it's limited by definition.
I think to possibly upset all the lighting designers here, if you end up with lighting that you can adjust, make brighter, make dimmer, and you can adjust in colour, and you end up with controls that are actually easy to use, then you come down to the question, do you need metrics? Because the only output will be the user preference at that moment in time in that space.
Yeah,
So what do you design to?
But if all you have is toffee pudding, is that what you're going to eat just because you like it? That's what I prefer, but I still eat a salad, although I don't prefer it. I mean, because I have a cortex that tells me I have to have a balanced diet, I have to exercise. So I don't think preference is what we should be basing our whole lighting design upon.
I think we have to give possibility. And most people don't understand what possibility is. But at some point, some people might, at which point metrics don't matter because they just go, this is what I want. And I will quite happily turn all the lights out and sit in a relatively dark space that breaks all the standards and regulations. Because that's actually what I want. I do like the dark.
Can I possibly add to this?
Yes, please.
Whether we go from pudding to soup, I'm not sure. Is that Peter's talked about personal preference, and if we sit in our own personal space and have control over it, then like anything else, we can abuse ourselves or do anything we like to ourselves. However, when we're in a collective space, such as the one at the moment, we actually have to think about other people. And the range of choice that we're now provided with places us in a position where, if I can coin a phrase, we have to play God to the rest of us. And on that basis, what do we do for others? And what principles do we base our decisions? And I think that's where incentives are leading forwards on now. We have the choice, what do we do? And having a metric and a way of measuring it and then communicating it is critical.
If I could just add, and apparently we're starting an argument here. When I showed those slides of the misses with high pressure sodium versus metal halide, they did not think they performed any different. And they don't have a preference to light the periphery of the road. Because you have no cortex devoted. You need to respond fast to know where it is. And your cortex tells you what it looks like and whether that's the preference. So if we put all our lighting on one part of the brain and ignored the others, not to mention the non-visual, which we have no access to, I think we're seriously going to miss the boat if we think that people know what's best for lighting. And your point about preference by individuals and taking the average, I mean, tyranny of the average is also something that we need to come to grips with. So I guess we all just stay home and have our iPhones attached to our head, and then we don't have to come to these places and we can do any way we want. Right? So we get rid of all these. Auditorium.
Okay.
I would like
To add to this, do we need to start again and reappraise what our reaction to the light we're provided with outside this building, and then we look at what level of translation we take from that to providing a different spectrum and intensity from other lights.
I would like to point out that I don't advocate giving somebody a piece of metal travelling at 70 miles an hour and then saying, choose what lighting you want.
Good clarification. David, please.
Can I point out that collective spaces are the norm now, and private spaces are not the norm. One of my frustrations is with research, is the majority of research when it's one-to-one modelling is normally done on a two-man office that doesn't exist anymore in the commercial world. And to sort of open this out, from my point of view, metrics now do not deliver compliance. I'll give you an example of this. One of my juniors did a calculation on AGI, relux and dialux for glare calculation and got 3 different answers with a variance of plus or minus 20%. How can you comply and how can you legally comply as a responsible person for that design with that kind of variance? So that even if the tools do work, they've got to work in a way that is benchmarked between the 3 of them, so that whatever they're, and the person can see that the design is there. I've had often areas of design where you've done a luminaire calculation. When you actually go and actually measure it in the environment in real time in the space, what you actually calculated in the model is not what was in, because the luminaire has been changed and the person's changed the LED design because you've gotten cheaper this week at someone else's factory, and the same LEDs are not in the fitting that you photometered. It really is very, very difficult now to comply.
But what's the alternative?
Well, the alternative is to have some figures, as we did with lamps, where we have model luminaires, and we design on that basis of a agreed output that CIE say is the output of the things, and people photometer with that agreed CIE source, which we had for years, and we work out a design that complies to that, and that's what we sign off against. And then the manufacturer and the contractor has to meet that design criteria based on that number.
So if I'm trying to understand your point, is that it's not that you're against metrics, you just want the right metrics. Is that what you're saying?
We need metrics that work.
Okay, that's what your point is. And I totally agree. And again, just to keep kicking this dead horse, photopic illuminance on a horizontal surface is not the metric that we need to use.
Absolutely. And we have something like the Well standard asking for melanopic illuminance on a vertical plane. What orientation is that vertical plane in the space? Clearly should be cylindrical illuminance is what they should be measuring against. And then it's direction independent.
But people's orientation is not.
Because you don't know where the person is looking.
You also possibly have the problem that things like the Well standard, they consider the hardest part to adopt and the biggest reason for failures in Well certification is the lighting requirements, because nobody can do them.
Can I reassure you it's about to be revised? And it's due to be reissued this month. I suspect it won't be, so let's go wait and see.
Good to know.
But we can always have an effect on it.
Okay, next question, Helen.
Moving back to the question about how we all respond differently, and I think we have an emotional response as well, but then as you say, it comes back to the only way we receive light is through our retina. How confident are you that all our retinas respond in the same way?
Well, I guess I believe in Darwin, and I think that speaking as an old world monkey, of which chimpanzees, apes, and humans are of that family, we have pretty common perceptual mechanisms. And even things that are highly conserved, like spectral potency for color mechanism, even a chicken has that. So is blue to a chicken the same as blue to me? Probably not. But the mechanisms inside the neurology is highly conserved across species and so on. I think what's important, so to answer your question, it's old world monkeys, that's why they do a lot of study on macaques to try to emulate humans. But how one interprets that is very cultural specific, background specific. Red light, for example, can mean very different things in different cultures. But I'm convinced that the Chinese and the Europeans and the Africans all see red light as red light. And if you were to measure it electrophysiologically in the eye or the brain, the response would be the same. But what it means to those different cultures, the emotions that you talk about can be quite different. And I think that's something that is another layer you add to it. But I believe fundamentally that the mechanisms underlying that signal transduction are common for old world monkeys.
And what about people who are red-green blind or something like that?
People that are what blind?
Red-green blind.
Yes.
Or we've heard a lot about how very many more school children are now requiring glasses than they did previously. So there's something happening to the way we are living and the environment we're experiencing, which is having an effect.
Well, unless the person's parents are cousins, the red-green blindness is only male, so you don't need to worry about that.
That's true. I like to think.
But the reason I make that point is we understand the mechanism. Why is it that you're red-green blind, and how does it occur? And that's very well understood. And so we can tell just by the X chromosome what it is you're going to have or you're not going to have. And again, when I say cousins, that means that the X chromosome would be the same that would allow you to have a woman 2 X chromosomes. If they have the same mapping, they can also be colorblind, which is very, very rare. But when it comes to the other issues related to lighting that are so important, I think that we have to remember that there's so many degrees of freedom to make people, we do work with the Swedes, we do work with the South Asians. The Swedes want very muted colors, and yet the South Asians want very vivid colors, and they have distinct preferences. So what you do as a lighting manufacturer for that market, those two markets will be radically different, but the fundamental mechanisms are the same. It's how the culture has interpreted light. I think that probably we don't do enough research on to really understand those issues.
And just to plug daylight here, but so for myopia, all the research seems to be suggesting that it's the very high levels of illumination that you can only get outside, and the lack of those are causing these epidemics of myopia. I think there was somewhere there's a daylight classroom they're trying out. So it's a large space for about 50 kids, with highly translucent walls and a ceiling which they can open up to control solar gain, but still very permeable to light, to bring up the levels to something, something just not approachable really with electric lighting. But what kids are missing out on is really outdoor time, and that the crucial stage for development of the eye.
But they used to think it was reading, that it was
Kepler was responsible for.
Right, and that theory has gone out. So now the current thinking is that it has to do with melatonin production in the retina itself, and it has to be cycled. So serotonin is the thing that seems to be cycled. So cycled light, daylight, and you only have daylight in the daytime, is that right? But nighttime is important too. The whole point of going through the 24-hour cycle becomes critical to really understand it. So yes, the current theory is that daylight and bright light outdoors is really what it is, but it's the cyclicity that also can't be forgotten. It's night and dark.
Good dark, nighttime.
But that's a current theory, and I'm a lot more confident about color blindness than I am on that one. So
You also have to be slightly careful. I've got no problem with the idea that myopia is increasing, but there will be an element of it that actually says we screen people better. So for an example, when I was at school, one of the people that was in my class was classed as, in the sort of parlance of the time, backward. It was only when they got to senior school they discovered that actually they weren't backward, they were partially deaf. Now they would have been caught immediately nowadays, whereas they weren't then. So there's actually a double whammy. You've got to be careful at all the statistics on how much of it is genuinely because we changed our lifestyle, and how much of it is genuinely because we're more health conscious and we do more screening in the first place.
So how do we start to educate the general public?
You want the answer to the big question?
I can be flippant. Yes, please. Well, there is an app for that. Interestingly, I think somebody who was there at the original launch of the iPhone suggested that on their sort of HealthMate app, which tells you how many steps you made or whatever and all this, they should actually tell you crucial bit of information, how much time you've been using devices like this. And given that often they're cloud linked, it'll tell you how much time you've been on your Mac or whatever, or your tablet and this. That would actually be quite instructive, I think, to have that sort of information. Information that basically tells you, go and do something else. Put this down, do something else.
I think to an extent, the general public is starting to become educated. So we've gone from complete ignorance, I do a light switch but I don't care what happens as long as I can see, to the complete panic, street lights killed my rabbit. I like rabbits.
Oh, Harvey again.
I know. And hopefully we'll get past that to start to understand that there is good lighting and there is bad lighting and how do we tell the difference. So at the minute we are in the real headlines, there was a one in Gateshead recently about the Sparrow Armageddon because they changed the street lights, which intrigued me, and he proved that. But we'll get past that But at least we're starting to talk about it. So hopefully that will then drive a more balanced view.
Okay, on that we're pretty much out of time, so if you've got any questions, grab them during the break. I'd just like to thank our speakers from this morning's session. Thank you very much.